So please welcome our guests today. Today's conversation is with Graham Campbell and Mark Fewer, both musicians playing a concert of music by Stephane Grappelli and Django Reinhardt right after this conversation in a tribute to the Heart Club of France. Now, violinist Mark Fewer has been coming. We had Guy Few last week, I shouldn't say that. Violinist Mark Fewer has been coming to the festival for about the past 4 seasons. Graham Campbell's been coming a little longer, about an extra 22 seasons, I'd estimate, Graham. But we're
You'd never know he was older than me. You'd never know.
But we're not here to talk about Graham's time as a toddler at the Festival of the Sound. I want to ask both of you, maybe we'll start with you, Mark, what a typical month might look like in the life of Mark Fewer, the violinist.
First of all, I would just say, it's funny you should confuse me with Guy Few, because the shirt I'm wearing is something Guy Few picked out for me. We were in his hometown of Saskatoon, and I'm very good friends with his whole family, and so I had, for the first time after knowing them for years, having dinner at their house. We went out to a place to look at men's clothing, and I walked in, and Guy had friends that owned this store, and I was just there kind of tagging along. And the guy just said, "Okay, you are leaving here with something fantastic," and this was it. So yeah, this is via Guy Few. A typical month. Well, this summer started with I was doing some replacement therapy for a string quartet. Scott St. John, who you will know as a member of the St. Lawrence Quartet, has recently had a child, he and his wife. And so I was replacing him inside the St. Lawrence for about 6 weeks. And that was, at the tail end of that time was the beginning of the summer. So that was a festival in in Charleston, South Carolina. Spoleto Festival, which was fantastic, playing things like Schubert Cello Quintet and a little bit of jazz, actually, that I had arranged for some Dave Brubeck tunes. After that, some teaching at the Domaine Forget International Festival, as well as some training for chamber music students at the National Youth Orchestra. And I flew out, in the middle of that, I flew out to Vancouver to record a new piece that had been written for me by Phil Dwyer for violin, stage band, and string orchestra. And just this last week, I was just in Toronto for the Toronto Summer Music Festival. Last night, playing a concert of Schoenberg Verklärte Nacht, string sextet, and Webern's Langsam-Ersatz. The night before that, actually, Graham and I played a set of tunes at the Conservatory Theatre in Toronto as well. So,
wow, and none of that even mentions your full-time job at McGill.
No, that's right. Well, I've seen some of my students in the last month who I either run into on the road or they'll come find me for a lesson. But yeah, my full-time position is as head of strings at McGill at the Schulich School of Music.
Wow. Graham?
Well, a typical month for me. One weekend in particular comes to mind as a good example. Last summer, I played with my dad in Ottawa at the Ottawa Chamber Music Festival, and they had me in a nice hotel, and and it was all playing music with the Zapp String Quartet from Holland.
Oh yeah.
And thoroughly enjoyable, wonderful, wonderful gig for me. And then I think the next night I went straight to Sudbury and played with a top 40 band playing dance and classic rock in a CD bar where we were put up in a dingy, windowless room in the basement underneath the bar. So that's kind of the range of performances that I'm dealing with.
Defined by the hotel rooms, yes. What does your business card say? Does it say pop guitarist, jazz guitarist, or doesn't it matter?
It says just guitarist. So anything that has to do with the guitar, I'm willing to give it a shot.
I kind of gave up on categorizing myself a while ago. I used to have business cards that say Mark Fewer, violinist, but now I just give out a card that says Mark Fewer, and people can put what label they want to on me. So, because I know there are lots of people who know me as a violinist in the classical tradition, or solo with orchestra or jazz violinist or exclusively just as a teacher. They might know me just as a teacher. All those things are things I love to do. So putting that all down on a card, it gets really complicated. So my name's Mark. Nice to meet you. Right.
Do you think that the divide is more in the way the audience listens or in the way the musicians play? The divide in categories?
Good question. Well, certainly any audience that comes to any concert will have, person by person, a different set of perceptions of what the concert will be about, and maybe about what the performer is all about. Because there's a certain sense of anticipation I guess an audience can have if you're about to come to a concert. And for example, today we're celebrating Stephane Grappelli and Django Reinhardt. I remember going to see Stephane Grappelli play his 86th birthday concert in London, England. And all the way there, from the hour it took for me to get from my southwest London home to the Barbican Centre, it was, I was just like, I was tingling the whole time. I was so thrilled about it. So that sense of anticipation, I think, is very real and can certainly be something that then injects itself into the performance. Because it was a tricky 20 seconds at the very beginning of that concert when, after having been led out onto stage with some assistants, Stephane sat down in a chair, put the fiddle under his chin, and the first sounds for about 20 seconds coming out of the violin were very bad. And I think many of us, our hearts sank. But then after that 20 seconds was over, it was spectacular for 2.5 hours. It was just amazing. At 86, he sounded like he was 25 again. It was amazing.
Wow. Graham, the makeup of the band that we're playing this music, just describe the band, would you?
Well, the band is, besides Mark Fewer, who lives in Montreal, all friends of mine from Toronto, basically. And it might be worth noting that typically when we're playing together, it's perhaps in a park on a sunny afternoon, or maybe at my house at 3 in the morning after a number of beers. And that's kind of the context that we usually play with each other. So
there are 3 acoustic guitars, and you all share the role, as it were, of Django Reinhardt?
Yeah, we're all taking our turns with the spotlight.
And a string bass. Yeah. Okay, let's pursue this the sound of the Hot Club of France. Where did Reinhardt and Grappelli draw the sound from? What did they bring to it? What traditions?
Well, when I think about what I first heard in my own perception of the sound of Django Reinhardt, the first thing that came to my mind was, being a Newfoundlander, it felt very, I won't say Celtic, but it felt very earthy. And the swing side of it obviously was immediately attractive to me. I felt like there was a side to the idea of it being gypsy that had a freedom to it that I guess people still find very appealing. And for me, that's the greatest appeal to it. And I think the fact that it has lasted as long as it has as a very vibrant musical form, this kind of hot club sound, because there are now hot clubs everywhere, right? There's probably a hot club of Paris Sound too, I don't know. But we've got there's like a hot club of Montreal, there's a hot club of San Francisco, a hot club of Austin, Texas. I mean, there's a hot club everywhere now. And that sound is, I think, something that people are attracted to because it is a sense of that freedom. Yet the technique you need to play a lot of this stuff is pretty advanced. It's not like you're playing in first position all the time on the violin, or when you're really figuring out chord progressions on guitar and figuring out how to play through solos. That stuff takes a lot of hours. There's a lot of. I
think Yehudi Menuhin found that out too when he was.
Yes, that's true. Very true. Your thoughts on this?
Well, the big difference between playing this style of jazz and the style of jazz that I normally play is the acoustic guitar versus the electric guitar. So I usually play jazz on my electric guitar, and when I went to school at Humber College, that's what I always used. That's what I always studied with and practiced with. So for me, it's a big difference playing on acoustic guitar, and I think it brings a kind of more folky sound to the music.
Is there a different relationship, do you feel, to the instrument? Like for me, if I was playing electric violin, the fact that the electric violin doesn't make any sound, and except for barely something you could hear under your ear, and in a sense, it's good for me to practice late at night in a hotel room with something like that. But certainly the tactile and physical sensation of being in a very intimate relationship to the instrument is something I adore. And so I'd imagine there's got to be that difference for you as well.
Yeah. The electric guitar to me feels very slippery and light, whereas on an acoustic guitar, it takes a lot more. You have to be much more aggressive, I think.
How close to the 30s, 40s sound are you trying to come to in what you do?
I think it's pretty close.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, yeah. I would say it's pretty authentic, except maybe the strings that I'm using. I think Grappelli actually sometimes would have used some gut
strings,
and I'm using all steel.
Graham, you were born a half century after this music was played. What appeals about it?
Well, I think, to be honest, just that it's a piece of history, and yeah, I think you can really the more music you listen to today, you can trace it back to something like Django.
Just moving to jazz in its broadest sense, Mark, is it a different process putting together a set for a jazz concert than it is to, say, putting together 4 movements for a Brahms sextet?
Definitely, although I mean, there's a number of ways one could describe it. First of all, when you're playing, I'm thinking of the last thing I would have done here last year would have been Brahms' G minor piano quartet with Jan Lisecki, right? Yes. And Doug McNabney on viola and Mark Johnson on cello. That was a great concert. I remember that. And putting that together, one has in one's mind a sense of an ideal that you start with and that you try to move towards as you perform. And the concrete nature of the structures of the piece of music that Brahms wrote, those are things he worked on for a long period of time. And in fact, Brahms famously would burn things that he didn't like the form of, or sometimes even the content of. And so we only have a few examples of pieces that he would have written that still exist, that if you were to play them through, they actually don't sound very good. And that's because he really tore his hair out to put together a masterwork. So something like that, putting together a masterwork and trying to approach it and to then communicate that to the audience, there is about, well, let's say at my age, I'm 39, for last year's concert, you could say that I've been practicing for that for 36 years, right? And there's some sense of truth to that, and I think that's the parallel that you would have to go into terms of preparing for a show like today, where it may not be that the same sense of ideal or form inside solos or forms of what we've structured in terms of arranging for tunes. Those things are present, but then what we're going to find inside improvisatory moments, you can't know until you're there. And in a sense, you have to be willing to fail once in a while and allow that to be okay, and even for that to be part of the process of the improvisation. So that's a very different set of variables. But again, you could say I've been practicing for this show for 37 years now.
Yeah. Is it in any way intimidating to know that Grappelli or Reinhardt played the solos that you're striving to recreate in a different way?
Yeah, I think so. Well, for example, the other guitar players tonight have studied Django much more extensively than I have, and they've really figured out exactly what he's doing. And then they sort of take that and they add their own things that they've picked up elsewhere. So you kind of hear a fresh version of Django almost.
Yeah, I would say that I for a while really wanted to try and sound like Grappelli. But I can never sound like Grappelli. I've given that up. Even though maybe once in a while it might sound like there's a little Grappelli in there, it has to basically be me. I remember as well, I used to be really attracted to Stuff Smith, another great jazz violinist, and I wanted to sound like Stuff Smith. But that all becomes part of a larger mixture that you hopefully can bring to the moment you're playing.
Just as it does in the classical, you're not trying to emulate a great violinist.
Yeah, I will never sound like Heifetz, so I'm not going to try to sound like Heifetz. But then again, not to be a jerk about it, Heifetz would never sound like Mark Fewer. He probably wouldn't like it, but that's just part of the presentation.
Yeah.